Okay, welcome to today's Earth System Governance Forum and the beginning of our Australia Research Centre event. I'm Jonathan Pickering. I'm based here at the University of Canberra School of Politics, Economics and Society. I think I know, well, certainly many of you in the room, and probably some of you online as well. And yeah, it's great to see you here today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting in person here today, the Ngunnawal Ngambri people, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I'd also like to extend respect to traditional owners of the state lands, those who are meeting online, and any First Nations people who are in the audience today. Recognise as well that this is the first anniversary of the Voice referendum, and it's quite a difficult time for many people. Many of us as well remain strongly committed to the recognition healing process. Thank you, for being here, and I hope it's going to be an interesting week, an interesting day. I'll just say a little bit about the aims of the day, a little bit of background. I think some of you are probably familiar with the Earth System Governance project. It's convening this forum, large research network of social sciences and humanities scholars, also increasing number of practitioners as well, who are involved in the network in one way or another. And the network's been operating for some 2 decades now. We have had, for most of those years, annual conferences, and some of you, I think, were at the Canberra conference back in 2015. Some people, I think, who are joining today were also involved in organising it. So Lorraine and John Dryzek will be here in a little bit. But we're doing things a little bit differently this time round. Largely because our sort of secretariat for the project is going through a bit of a transition process. So the secretariat's been based at Utrecht University in the Netherlands for some 5 years now, and we're in the process of moving to a new host. And by the way, we have a colleague from Utrecht University here, Julia Chazzy. So thank you so much for being here. It's worked out well that it's coincided with your research visit to Australia. And obviously very grateful for the support of the Utrecht University and also a range of supporters for this forum during the week. So I won't say too much about We'll sort of explore the theme of the forum a little bit during the day, this idea of reimagining Earth system governance in an era of polycrisis. Hopefully we can sort of unpack that a little bit as we go along. But the main sort of structure of the day, I think, as you know, is we have these 4 sessions, which have each been organised by colleagues here in Canberra, who've been involved in ESG in one way or another. We sort of wanted this to be a bit of a sort of bottom-up kind of event, depending on the interests that our colleagues have. And I'm sure we can find some sort of interesting connections with the polycrisis idea. We've got our food systems session coming up in a moment, and then and obviously there are those connections, clear connections with food systems and various sort of intersecting crises. And then the 3 other sessions that we have during the day, perhaps we could think of in terms of different ways of thinking about reimagining, responding to polycrisis. One on transdisciplinary work, one on speculative futures, and then one on deliberation and reflexivity. So just a couple of points about the day itself. The hybrid format will try our best to make it work smoothly. If you want to join online, you're welcome to. I think some of you may have the sort of login as participants for the sessions, but we'll have the screen running up here as well. in terms of logistical things, bathrooms, as you may know, are sort of around that away. Wi-Fi, you can either log in via EduRoam or through your home login. I think there is even a Canberra free Wi-Fi that you can connect to here if you want to. And we might have just a very brief round of introductions of the in-person audience or participants, seekers as well. And as we go along, we'll hear from the online participants and attendees too. So I'll also just mention as well, thanks to our volunteers, Ash, who's our student volunteer. Huge help already so far. Our colleague Wendy Lam. Yeah. And and Ash will be helping with the technical side of things, and Wendy with various room-related things. We'll try and do a group photo at some point during the day too. And yes, okay. So I probably missed one or two things, but did anyone have any sort of questions or comments before we do our round of introductions? Okay, all right. Well, maybe can we go begin with Wendy?
Online Zoom room.
Maybe what I'll do is we're going to sort of turn the camera around at various points so that you can see the room a little more clearly. There we go.
So we're introducing ourselves.
Yeah, just very briefly.
Okay, you've already heard why I'm Wendy Lam, based here at the Centre for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance.
Hello, I'm Ro McFarlane. I'm based here in the Health Research Institute as part of the HEAL, Healthy Environments and Lives Global Research Centre.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michiel Piersma. I'm based at ANU at the School of Politics and International Relations. It's my first time joining the ESG network, so I'm excited. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Leah Cherzich. I'm based in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I'm here for a research visit to the Sydney Environment Institute, and now I'm here from Canberra. Very excited to be here in person, and I'm a co-convener of the Democracy Working Institute.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Claudia Munera. I'm working in CSIRO in the Value and Sustainability FSP, based here in Canberra.
Hello, Karina Wyborn. I'm at the ANU in the Institute for Water Futures and also the Fenner School of Environment and Society. Long been tagging along to ESG. So it's exciting to see another one here in Canberra.
Chris Reedy, I'm at the Institute for Sustainable Futures up at UTS, and similarly been tagging along to ESG for a while. Great to be here.
I'm Rebecca. I'm at CSIRO here in Canberra. I work with Claudia in the Valuing Sustainability Future Science platform. It's my first time joining this ESG event and network. So thank you too.
Hi everybody, my name's Emma. I'm over in Western Australia at CSIRO, Claudia and Rebecca also at the Future Science, Valuing Sustainability Future Science. So, and it's my first time joining one of the ESG events.
Hi everybody, Jane Alba is my name. I'm here at the University of Canberra with the Centre for Environmental Governance, and this is my first ESG.
A very good morning to everyone. I'm Kunzang Shoten. Unlike the other participants who are representing organizations, I'm not associated with any organizations, but I studied transdisciplinary research. So I'm very keen to really understand how the different approaches of transdisciplinarity is being used to solve global sustainability challenges. So I'm here to really learn and network. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leonie Pearson, and I'm also a virgin ESG person. And I'm here at the University of Canberra.
Hi everyone, those online. My name is Jordan Roods. I'm also based at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS with Chris. Yeah, echo Leonie's sentiment. I'm also a virgin for the ESG network, but happy to be here.
Hi guys, I'm Ash. I'm an undergrad student in IR and psychology. This is my second year, and Jonathan is a tutor of mine. So that's how I found out about this conference, and I'm really happy to help.
Thanks everyone for your introductions, and it's great that we have some people who are quite familiar with the network already, and others who are quite new to it. So I hope you'll. For those of you who are new to it, I hope you'll find it interesting just seeing some of the range of work that scholars in the network do. All right, so I think we might get started with our panel. We have our online panelists who have joined, but I might suggest if our in-person panelists can come up here for now, and then Leonie, our session moderator, will introduce the session. And we will
go
through.
I'm just going to flag, I'm really sorry, at 11:30 I have to step out for a meeting.
That's fine. No worries. That's fine. We will.
I'm the same.
You are banned, you are out. Not at all.
So it's super hot in here. Anyone else feeling that?
Yes.
Yeah, if there is really not, it doesn't.
Right. Okay, are we good?
I think we're good, yes. And also just so everyone knows, I think for people who can't join live, the session will be recorded, and I think will just be available to people who've registered for the forum. So hopefully everyone's okay with that. I'm assuming there's not going to be anything too scandalous or confidential coming out.
Excellent. Okay, so if we're keeping it in-house, that's sort of nice, a bit like Chatham House rules almost. We can say things, but we just can't tell people who said them. Okay, so welcome again. My name's Leonie Pearson. In my brief introduction, I'm an associate professor here at the University of Canberra in the Centre for Environmental Governance. It's really exciting to be here this morning, and I actually think that we're kicking off today with one of the most important issues that we're going to be facing, all of us, over the next sort of future that we can see, the concept of just pathways for sustainable food systems and farmers. As part of an ESG sort of virgin, as I've already notified, I'm a little concerned that maybe I've got the wrong hook here. Maybe I'm in the wrong place, or perhaps we've sort of got a great panel of people from diverse perspectives, and we may not be touching on the issues that you want to hear or see. But I think the reality is that all of us have a significant contribution to make to the concept of our food systems into the future, whether we buy our apples, whether we grow our apples, or whether we don't eat apples at all. All of us make these decisions that have an impact. And as such, today's panel is to bring together those alternate perspectives and to also have a discussion about it. So, whilst we're gathered here both in person and virtually, I think it's one of the remits that we gave to the whole panel was to talk about that the global community has made significant strides in planning for future food systems. However, these efforts have mainly neglected certain aspects: water security, climate change, land use pressures, or moreover, some have overlooked the importance of creating just pathways. So these would deliver inclusive and sustainable outcomes for both the food systems and the farmers that are involved in it, as well as society as a whole. So in this session, what we're aiming to do is to explore strategies for sustainability governance at all scales, from global to local. And we're going to hear from different people and their experiences to achieve this. We're going to draw insights from both theoretical advances and practical innovations. And we'll also identify some key principles for designing and delivering just pathways for sustainable food systems and farmers. That's actually what I asked all of the speakers that we're going to have here today. What are your top 3 principles that you think that we should include? I'm a very practical academic. Some people might call me a pracademic, which means that I'm really interested in things that make a difference. And as such, we've got a really nice diversity of people here today. So we're going to start off with Jordan Roots from the University of Tech, Sydney, who is going to give us a bit of an overview of some of the work that they're doing there. We'll then move on to James Butler, who's joining us from New Zealand. Hi, James. He's from, I always say this wrong, Cawthron. Institute, and he's going to be sharing some of his insights and focusing on marine to terrestrial integration of food systems. We've then got Ulavan from Laos. So Ulavan is from the National University of Laos, and she's going to be highlighting the importance of smallholder farmers and particularly the developing countries' perspectives. And then lastly, we've got Ro McFarlane. I didn't mean that as lastly. I mean, she's our final speaker from the University of Canberra that's bringing in a One Health perspective. So as you can see, we're coming from all different areas. So the outline is that each of the speakers will have 5 minutes. That will be have a moderated discussion afterwards, and that I've got a set of questions, but I'm really keen to hear questions from the floor and online as well. So please get them ready, even if you have to leave for a meeting. All right, so before we kick off with all our great speakers, I'd just like to provide a little bit of context for those that may not be totally across the issues around food systems. So you probably know that United Nations FAO has been leading voice in calling for a transition in our food systems. We need to do better with what we're currently doing. The IPCC has also had a huge emphasis on just transitions and what this might mean for the food systems as well. And then, of course, we've got civil society organisations and farmer associations worldwide that have been advocating for a change in who and where and how that we produce our food. It's absolutely crucial to understand that by 2050, we're going to have 9.7 billion people. That's a little bit more than what we've currently got. But more importantly, we're going to be producing about 60 to 70% increase in food is what the demand is currently talking about. The current number of farmers in the world is about 570 million. So if you think that we're going to increase food with the same number of farmers, then I think you might be being creative in what we're doing. But at the same time, we can't be doubling the number of farmers that we've got as well. So what are we doing? Particularly as of those 570 million, 90% of those are run by individuals or a family labour. So the issue about smallholder farmers and farmers in our transition is significantly important. Whilst these farmers may be a large number, they're not producing the largest amount of food. So they produce about 35% of the world's food that's being consumed, and they manage about 12% of the current agricultural land that's under production. Issues around land use change, who and where and how, who owns the land, who governs the land, who's got access to land are all some of the things that have been pushing up when we talk about a transition to a sustainable food system. We'll be coming back to the concept about what a just transition is. But for those of you that are still sort of thinking about this, we're talking about things like social dialogue and stakeholder engagement. So we're involving the multiple decision makers and who and where they should be. We're talking about skills development or capabilities development. Where and how, what sort of knowledge is needed now and in the future at all levels. We're also talking about social protection and safety nets. So supporting vulnerable groups, but also empowering them to make better decisions and to be more involved. We have got things like economic, environmental, sustainability and growth that are also critically important for most of these smallholder farmers. And of course, gender, equity and social inclusion. And if you're part of DFAT, disability is in there as well. But it's more about being inclusive of where and how. We're also looking at fair distribution in both production and in processes. So there's a lot to be thinking about when we think about just transitions. With that in mind, I would like to say a big thanks to Jordan. He's going to kick us off with some of his insights from the work that's happening in UTS. Jordan is a PhD student as well as a research associate, so he's going to be talking from both those lenses here today, and we're excited to have you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonie. I'm just going to bear with us. The technical issues of doing a hybrid event. Yes. So thanks for that warm introduction, Leonie. My name's Jordan Roods. I'm based at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS. And today, during the panel discussion, I'm going to be talking about what an Earth-centered governance lens for nutrient circularity in food systems might look like. Before we start, I'd also like to quickly acknowledge country and recognise the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're meeting. So I'll give a quick plug of my research. I'm a member of the ARC Nutrients in a Circular Economy Research Hub, or NICE Hub, which is based at UTS, but it's actually a research collaboration of universities, government departments, industry partners, and organisations from civil society. And we're really working together to create a circular nutrient economy in Australia, which is based on the recovery and recycling of the nutrients contained in organic byproducts, namely human urine, which is super concentrated in these essential nutrients, and converting them for reuse in sustainable fertilizers. And I'm going to quickly give an overview of what a circular nutrient economy is. So a bit of background around nutrients and the kind of issues that they're causing in today's society. So phosphorus and nitrogen are vital nutrients for life in all living beings. However, since we exceeded their natural biogeochemical flow in the 1960s and 70s, principally from the overproduction and application of mineral fertilizers to the land, the Earth has faced severe socio-ecological consequences, including nutrient runoff that leads to eutrophication and mass fish kills in aquatic ecosystems. To bring this planetary boundary back within livable limits requires new approaches to the way that we conduct farming. A circular economy is a regenerative economic model to replace the current take, make, dispose linear extractive economy, which has caused the kinds of socio-ecological impacts that we've seen today. Leonie has given a really great overview of the issues that we're facing in the food system. And I like to think of the circular economy as a broader umbrella concept and it's based on principles such as eliminating waste and pollution from the economy, designing products for longevity, and regenerating natural ecosystems. So situated under this macro concept is the idea of circular economies as they apply to different sectors. And today we're talking about that in the context of the food system. So a circular food economy is one that's based on the principles and practices of an industrial ecology, which looks at natural resource flows within the food system, such as nutrients, and also an agroecology, which looks at indicators such as soil health, biodiversity rates, ecosystem services, and also appreciates cultural diversity within the food system. And a really essential component of a circular food economy is this idea of nutrient circularity, which is based on, firstly, the reduction of nutrient losses across the entire agri-food value chain, and also the recovery of those nutrients for reuse in end markets, such as organic fertilizers. So my research, my PhD research, the theoretical framework that I'm looking at is Earth jurisprudence, which shares a lot of overlaps with the ESG project. It evolved out of the writings of Thomas Berry in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And it argues that human beings exist as one interconnected species, part of a broader Earth community, which is made up of both living and non-living entities. And that the Earth is a subject rather than a collection of objects that exist for human use and exploitation. There are three priority areas or principles from Earth jurisprudence, which I believe can be embedded in our food system, specifically as it relates to my research on nutrient circularity. So firstly, the principle of recognizing the intrinsic value of the Earth community, such that the Earth is valued for what it already is as provided by nature, and not for any particular human use or advantage. An example of what this might look like in a circular nutrient economy is laws that legally recognize the rights of aquatic ecosystems to be free from anthropogenic eutrophication. A second principle would be that the dominant rationale for decision-making in any circumstance related to the food system is environmental protection, whereby a responsibility is placed on us to act in a way that is consistent with maintaining the natural environment as far as possible in its natural state. And thirdly, that governance instruments are informed by laws of nature. That is, laws that are based on scientific ecological limits, such as life cycles, biodiversity rates, and ecological limits. And an example of that in the food system would be, for example, agroforestry, which integrates trees into agricultural landscapes to provide shade, improve soil health, and support wildlife. I think I'm probably at time, so I'll leave it there. But if you'd like to get in contact with me, my details are there, and they're also on the website for the forum. Thank you.
Thank you. There I was thinking I was going to have to jump up, but you've already stopped us. Okay.
We're early in the day.
Yeah, that's right. We're on time and we're focused. It's nice to see. That's great. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for kicking us off and giving us our starting 3 principles. All right, I'd now like to jump over to James online. James, can you hear and see us?
Yes, kia ora koutou. Hi, Leonie. Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, can do. We're just going to see if we can share. Okay. We can share your beautiful face, perhaps, Nama?
Probably, I think the
But
slide is
anyway.
more attractive if you can find the slide.
Oh, we've got the slide. We can definitely do the slide. If that's what you'd like. Great. While they're just popping that up, would you like to get started?
Thanks, Leonie. Hello, everyone. Yes, so it's James here, calling you from Nelson in New Zealand. Leonie kindly asked me to come and contribute to this discussion, which I'm very interested in. We will shortly see, hopefully, a slide with an image on it. We are working at the moment through the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, who many of you will be familiar with, on a project in the Pacific region, looking at adaptation pathways for coastal food systems. We're focusing on 2 countries, Kiribati as a coral atoll island, or many islands, and the Solomon Islands, which are a little bit more diverse and have particularly more high ground in terms of forest and water and mountains, and therefore provide a different example of coastal food systems. So the work that we're doing is really trying to explore tools and techniques that are locally driven to help communities, households, and although they don't really use the term necessarily, farmers, to think about the future and how they're going to try and adapt to not just climate change, but also uncertainty as a whole. Bearing in mind that COVID-19, which we all seem to have forgotten about, had a huge impact across food systems globally, and also in the Pacific. And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned there in terms of how to think about future uncertainty and shocks of that kind. So thanks for putting the slide up. That looks good. Hope you can all see that.
Yes, it's great.
So this image, just to
see your for some reason we can't see your camera though.
Are you happy
That's
just
okay.
with the slide?
Can you
please?
hear me?
That's okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes,
slide's good.
we can hear you. Great.
Yep, you
Thanks.
don't need to see me. Yeah, so this, just to explain, this image was drawn by a local artist in the Solomon Islands location where we're working, called Desmond Wayuta, and he wanted to draw this as a sort of a translation of how they see pathways for them at the local community level. And in their particular case, in their village called Sairagi, they really see the process as something like navigating one of their Tomoko canoes through increasingly stormy and uncertain seas, led by dolphins. Dolphins being a totem species locally, with all sorts of supernatural powers and ability to guide, and they also taste good. So there's a bit of a food element to that too. So the idea being that the dolphins will help lead through the stormy seas towards a future vision, which is the island in the background, where they hope to get to at some stage where things will be better than they are at the moment. And I'll come back to this image in a minute as one of the principles that we've been trying to work through. So I think one of the things we've been doing, which leads to the first principle, is trying to understand decision-making around food systems and food systems change in these local contexts. And what we're discovering very quickly is that it's very, very hard to find who makes the decisions and who really has the power and the agency in these complex coastal food systems, which involve terrestrial and marine environments and multiple households and stakeholders. And consequently, what we're trying to think about in terms of governance is how we shape a new form of governance around what are very complex systems. So the first principle that I wanted to mention, and we can maybe dig into later, hopefully, is that while these processes and decision-making must be obviously locally led to be just, it still requires multiple stakeholders to be involved to govern that food system transition or transformation. And what that multiple stakeholder hybrid, polycentric, whatever you want to call it, governance framework looks like is very largely driven by the local context, as you can imagine. But it is certainly something that doesn't exist at the moment. And I think that's something that we're trying to grapple with at the moment in terms of trying to help design what that governance system might look like. Second principle I think is important, which also is reflected a little bit in this image, is that I think it's very important to think about visioning, to create firstly intergenerational awareness, to help people think about their children and their children's children rather than just today or tomorrow, which is very often what the focus is, particularly at a local level. And I think the other reason for trying to help or to concentrate on visioning of the future is to really think more about a positive solution space. The narrative which we're all familiar with, and in a way, Leonie, you painted it just now, is sort of doom and gloom, particularly in the Pacific in terms of sea level rise. But I think it's very important to think beyond that, because that is very disempowering. So the question here is, how do we use visioning to really help people not dream about utopia, but as I once heard an economist, Giddens, say, think of a realistic utopia. Or utopian realism, I think he called it. So that's something that we're trying to use as well to build a solution space rather than just be lost in confusion and doom and gloom, which is not productive. And the third principle, which again relates to this image, is I think it's important to embed the pathways thinking, and particularly future thinking, within a cultural analog, to bridge local and scientific worldviews, and also to inevitably empower local knowledge. The future means many different things to many different people, and in the Pacific, depending on where you are, even between local villages, it has a different meaning or a different concept. So I think trying to break open the future and what that means to many different people is important. And using artwork like this is one way to do that. And that's been very successful in this particular case in Sairagi. So Leonie, I think I'll leave it there if that's okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That is terrific, James. Really nice to hear from a different perspective as well. I know, Jordan, you mentioned that your work is based at UTS, but you've got a whole selection of people, Australia-based principally involved?
Yeah, but we also do international work as well. Yeah.
Nice.
In the Pacific as well.
In the Pacific,
yeah.
Great. Okay, so from there, so we've got Jordan, James has got us a bit further out, and now we're going to go to Ulavan, who's joining us from Vientiane in Laos, and Ulavan is a senior lecturer there at the National University of Laos and has done a lot of work working in the health space, but a lot of work with farmers and talking about their production of food systems. Noi, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you very much, Ronnie. Yeah, let me share my slide as well.
Awesome.
I'm not sure that I can share or not.
Jonathan is just twiddling his fingers, but I mean that in a very constructive way, seeing if he can get something working. But just while he does that, I'd just like to share with people that Noi and I have been working on and off for, I think it's like 5 years now, looking at issues around Mekong water management, particularly across different countries. And now we've started a new project looking at the future of smallholder farmers in Laos and in Vietnam. So We were having a chat last week in Bangkok, weren't we?
Thank you very much, Leonie. I think I will no need to share my slide. I'm sorry for that. Maybe some technical problem. Good morning, everyone. Very nice to be invited to join these sessions. My name's Ulawan. I'm the lecturer and assistant professor at the Faculty of Environmental Science, National University of Laos. So as Leonie mentioned, that I'm also a part of a project with the Canberra team. So today I would like to share a pathway for sustainable food system and farmers, particularly the small farmers in developing country as Laos. So regarding to the food system and the transformations for the food securities in the future is very complex topics that there involve many factors like climate change, gender equalities, or the sustainable developments. This will be the big change and require a lot of support from the policies and the participations of all sectors in the society. Today, I would like to go for the three elements or three principles for the sustainable food system and farmers. First thing, we would focus on the sustainable production and consumptions. Regarding the food productions, and it must be environmental friendly, and it must be able to meet the needs of the populations. And nowadays, people are changing by consume more healthy food and more organic food. So in Laos also, we try to promote the small farmer who are doing the traditional farm and provide very organic food by processing the biocomposting and avoid using the chemical fertilizers. So this also, in the long term, it could be the more market needs regarding to the healthy and sustainable markets. And the second one is talking about the gender equalities and also the participations from all the stakeholders to support the farmers, not just only the producer or the consumer. There would be more factors influence like middlemen or policies or the government in order to support the farmers itself. For example, in Laos, we still facing a lot of challenge for the smallholder farmer that the middleman has influence in terms of the pricings and also the sustainability of the variety of the food. So this one to ensure that gender participations or stakeholder participation equally and everyone has a benefit from the food system. And the thirdly is about the climate the resilience or the sustainable food securities based on the food system that must be applied like a sustainable approach in order to promote the climate smart agriculture. And nowadays we have adapt from the climate situation. There are a lot of using technology or IoT for the smart farm and the method from the reducing the climate impact, such as cover the crops or precision the nutrient management and efficiency the irrigations. And nowadays this technique has been starting and expanding in Laos. And also we are trying to introduce reducing the soil moisture by making the greenhouse and also making try to protect the soil erosions and soil fertilities. Moreover, the sustainable water resource management also very efficient for the applying into the farming system and the smart farm. And as I mentioned, that policy support and investment is also important to sustain the local or smallholder farmers in the particular area. And the policy have to promote the variabilities and the sustainable agriculture and investments, necessarily infrastructure. Yeah, and also capacity building. That's very important for training and education. And the farmer, they have to apply the knowledge for the scientists and for the traditional knowledge. And it can be a good integrations from the adaptations. And to meet the sustainable food system, I think climate resilience and zero budget planning is very important, and promoting traditional agriculture and agroecological process, knowledge and skill to share through the mentoring among the farmer themselves by exchange the knowledge or study visit. So this methodology that we are implementing in Laos, we see that the effectiveness of the lesson learned and sharing by farmer to farmer is more effective. And we are always having the study visit from Laos and Thai, where they are advancing on agriculture approach. Yeah, this is some key elements and some example from Laos that I can share for the sustainable food system and farmers in Laos. And I think one last thing that I would mention about the cellular waste regarding to the agriculture waste, that's also more important things that we also have to focus on recycle waste and shifting the circular economy and reducing the waste from the providing food business. Yeah, that's sustainable food and not only the environmental friendly, but also need to promote communities' well-being and long-term food securities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olavan. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so you've pulled up a couple of the same principles I think that Jordan has been mentioned to start with, and you also started to talk about some of that more circular thinking, which is great to see that sometimes whilst we come from different perspectives, we may not have such enormously differing views. Terrific. So our final speaker on the panel today is Ro Hill. Now, Ro has a really nice experience from the health perspective, ranging all the way from local up to global. So we're looking forward to hearing your principles and to hearing more from all of them, all the speakers after.
Thanks, Leonie. So I am coming from a health perspective, and what I'm wanting you to think about particularly is, as I give you some perspectives, is thinking about the change of narrative and that global to local. And I'm going to frame what I say to you in that way. One of my major occupations of the last few years has been working for the Intergovernmental Panel of Biodiversity Ecosystem Services Science Policy Platform. Just mucked that up, but it's IPPES, right? And for 3 years, I've been mucking up that acronym. But the nexus assessment that I've been working on is really trying to bring together biodiversity ecosystem services, food, water, health, and climate, and look at where you can get those interlinkages, where you can get good governance, and where you can get measurable outcomes. And I can't talk too much about that, but I come into that spectrum from a health perspective, and this is why I'm going to give you this first principle, that thinking about food from a rights-based approach, from a right to health, from a right to food, is an absolute core principle, because the moment you do that, you stop thinking about food as a commodity and you start really thinking specifically about what we need and how best to produce it, how best to redistribute it. So you'll all know that the global figures are that we have somewhat under 1 billion people undernourished and upwards getting closer to 2 billion who are overnourished. It's all malnourishment. And there is severe, or significant, I should say, health implications for that malnourishment, and it comes at a cost to the planet. So when you start to think about health, what is it that we need to eat to make us healthy? We start to disregard processed food, ultra processed food, I should say, because much of our food that's very healthy has been processed. And we also think about increasing our plant component of our diet. And once we start thinking about that, we shift thinking somewhat away from animal agriculture. And that is something that is a bit of a hot topic and needs to be debated in specific situations for specific populations, particularly women of reproductive age, places where there's a protein insufficiency. But as a whole, we are consuming far more meat than we require, and certainly far more processed food. So once you start putting that into perspective, once we start thinking about health, there is both a pathway towards healthy and sustainable diets. And a lot of this work has been contributed by groups like Eat Lancet, who've given us that planetary health diet, but also many others who've come to intersect with what are shortcomings or future areas of research within that space. But it also means that when you shift food into that health perspective, you're talking about preventative health, you're talking about money saved, you're talking about a redistribution of food so that you're addressing food insecurity as well as health. And it gives a different framework, really, to approach food. Now, I have a particular background, which is One Health, which means I have an interest in getting optimal outcomes for humans, plants and animals and the environment. And that is a theoretical perspective that goes back at least a century. It's got much greater purchase these days because we now have global associations between the Food and Agricultural Organization, the World Health Organization, the World Animal Health Organization, and now the United Nations Environment Programme. So we have a governance structure with which to look at those intersections, and that's really important. However, my other principle, which is about global to local, is that we can understand that we could, as the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet undertook to do, feed everyone so they are healthy within the capabilities of current agricultural production with redistribution of food. We can think about that at that level, but it's, of course, very hard to do. So that global thinking is incredibly important to deal with equity, to deal with planetary boundaries, and, as I say, to think health ways about food. But what we do at a local level is actually where the solutions come from. And my other speakers have drawn on this because many of their talks have been about place-based solutions. If we look at what's happening in a developed country like Australia, in many of the European countries, North American countries, we are developing local food strategies. Now, these whole of government local food strategies really bring together health, social support, education, economies, environment, and these are real governance structures which are making a difference, and they are absolutely based on broad stakeholder engagement, which is incredibly important because that place-based element is essential because our populations are different, our cultural backgrounds are different, our ecosystems are different in places, and also the evolved governance structures within our local governments or nations or whatever are different. So making solutions at that local level is incredibly important. And we've seen time and time again that a lot of the innovators come from grassroots. They're the local food producers trying to manage all these issues. They're the food relief agencies trying to make a difference to food insecurity within a local community. So I need to wrap up, but I have said food as health, food in a local to global context, and I would absolutely advocate for a One Health approach. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Terrific. Well, I think we've got lots of food for thought. Sorry. A big thanks to the panel. It was really exciting to hear the different perspectives, but now we're opening it up for questions and queries. I'm hoping that we've got a couple of questions or thoughts that you might have out there, either online or here in the room. And while you're just thinking about those, so get them ready, I want to have, we're not excluding the people online whatsoever, but I do just want to touch on two of the things that were pulled up here in the room. And one was, Jordan, you were talking about an earth jurisprudence approach. And Ro, you actually mentioned a rights-based approach. I was wondering, how do those two approaches sit together when we're talking about food systems and the farmers that are involved in them? Have you thought about that while you're choking?
I am choking, and
I'm sorry.
I think with the excitement of finishing, I must have set something off. Look, the rights-based approaches are so embedded in the Declaration of Human Rights from the 40s that I think it's a bit unfair to ask them to deal with planetary boundaries, which means that we're shifting our thinking. But I think basic human rights are almost de facto Earth system rights, because the two can't operate without, and it's making that narrative. And I'm going to stop there just so that I don't dominate. But I think that's what the shifting narrative is.
Yeah, so you can look at it as that rights-based, and then in a more, I guess, we can talk about maybe a pragmatic approach. You see jurisdictions around the world, this idea of personhood being applied to nature. I guess that's what my research is looking at in some ways. So you've seen that in New Zealand, where legal personhood has been granted to a river and forest system there. And I think that approach is quite pragmatic because it's a legal fiction, right? But it's one that we're used to in our Western legal framework. For example, we do it with corporations, ships, every day of the week. So that's an example, I guess, of one where you could bring a rights-based approach into kind of a food system context.
Excellent. Thanks. Okay, well, I guess I'm still thinking that one through, because I've been applying the human rights-based approach and their principles of engagement and empowerment and participation and other elements. And it seems to me that it really depends on who and what and where we're talking about. And I don't mean to be small-minded, but it's like if we have rights for everyone to have access to the food they need when they need it. So this is both a quality, quantity of food and a distributional issue. And then we have earth jurisprudence that we've got, the ecosystem has rights in and of itself. It would seem that we've got a real tension at the moment in our current production systems. So if we're thinking future-wise, I sort of think got a lot of steps to jump through to get there.
If I could respond, there's lots, this is so complex, it's very hard to deal with in a very quick amount of time. But once you start trying to marry the two, obviously we've got a tension between how many people we can feed and how big the planet is. And rights-based approaches to reproductive rights, access to family planning, are another right that you might bring into this. You might also bring in to a discussion, where am I going with this? Well, I guess it's really that planetary boundaries. If we can put that into the narrative, then I think that we start thinking differently. And I think it's, you use that creative fiction. I mean, we know that we can't infinitely increase, or some people would say that we can, but we have to take a very rational view. And it's not even as if our populations will continue to explode. They're levelling out very much now. So in many ways, we actually need to change our thinking so that we consider this period now as a period of doing things differently, where we address rights and we address limits and we do our very best to preserve ecosystems because we need them for every other aspect of our health, as well as rights of other species. It's a minefield and it's not very well supported by industry or trade.
Thanks. All right. Have we got any questions from our room here? Thank you. Jane, would you like to share?
Sure. And can online hear me if I pitched about this volume?
James and Dawn?
Or do you need me to come up the front?
I think it should be fine. We've got the room mic.
Okay, there's a question for James, but I'm interested in everybody's view. And I was really fascinated, James, that you're doing work with Kiribati as a former resident of Kiribati. And what I'm trying to unpack is you were talking about intergenerational notions, and you did acknowledge a Western series or scientific series of time and an Indigenous series of sense of time. But I'm wondering if when we're talking about the importance of locally led, and yet we're going in and trying to impose a very Western scientific notion of time, there seems to be a tension there. And I was just hoping you might unpack that a little more. We seem to be saying we're going to be locally led, but yet we're imposing our notions of time.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question, and something which I don't think there's a simple answer to, other than to slightly sidestep it and say, well, it depends where you are. Some places that discussion is quite easy to have, and other places it's very difficult. I remember one place in PNG once I was working, and they were quite clear that time is circular. So in other words, what's about to happen has already happened. And so there you are with a linear idea about time and planning through a linear progression of events. And that was very difficult. And what we discovered there, at least if you take that as a sort of a most difficult situation, is that they can still agree that there's certain steps that you can take to get to where you want to be, regardless of whether the time is circular or not as distinct as you think it might be. So I think there's still areas or sort of arenas or spaces where you can still come to a sort of a general agreement that there's still action that needs to be taken, and that you can sequence that to avoid things that you don't want to happen, which is what pathways thinking is really about. So I think it varies. And in terms of another perspective on it is that if you can use genuine sort of co-production approaches to this, then you actually generate something completely new out of the two different points of view or the two different perspectives. And that's great on paper, but it does take time. And maybe if I had had a fourth principle, I would have said that we need to be able to spend a lot of time trying to do this kind of co-production or meeting of worldviews. And unfortunately, as we know, time is of the essence in some senses, but also funding doesn't pay for endless processes that never seem to come to any real output, which is what our funders tend to want. So I think that if we can find the time to have these discussions and find those areas of agreement where you can actually understand that we do want things to get better and we can agree on actions to get there, despite the sort of different perspectives on what time might be, I think it's still possible.
Thank you.
A good question, thank you.
John?
Oh no, just the issue of time reminds me of, there's an academic in the ESG network who looks at this idea of deep time in the way that we're designing our institutions and governance mechanisms. And then we need to, I guess, to my principle, and we're setting up these systems based on the laws of nature. You know, we're looking at carbon cycles that are based on thousands of years, and we're not necessarily thinking in that mindset in the way that we think of governance in our human system. So yeah, that kind of came in for me as well.
Leonie.
Yes.
Briefly there, and Jordan, yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think that perhaps the colleague you're thinking of is Frederick Harnosch. Yes, written 3 hours. yeah, was actually visiting here earlier this year and talked about some of his work on deep time. There's a one of the Cambridge Elements series, which is about this the politics of deep time. So all worth a read.
Okay, so I've got a question to our panelists. If we go back through the principles that we've sort of talked across, there looks like there's some really key themes that we can pull out. One of them is around that we need to have it locally led. We've certainly, with our talk about pathways, locally led, but with multiple stakeholders involved. And we need to talk about empowerment as some of those elements. One of them is about the concept of pathways implies that there's either a single sort of governing body or that there's someone that's telling us where we're going. And I guess I wanted to open this up to the whole panel, is that this idea that there's a hand pulling the puppet strings, or that there's a single visioning future, either positive or negative, taking on James's point that, you know, it's certainly not doom and gloom, does not help us. And thanks, James, for pointing that out. My introduction wasn't meant to be gloom and doom, but I can see how it could be read that way. More I was trying to reflect that time is of the essence, that things are happening either intentionally or unintentionally, and this is an opportunity for us to be more intentional about that. But I guess the question to the panel is there a single governing body that there is that we need to be tapping into? Or when we talk about these pathways, are they truly just multiple locally led pathways going forwards? And this concept that we're a global sort of food systems production is a bit of an academic myth sort of side issue that, you know, helps us get a paper published or something, but isn't that useful. I want to start off with Ro, because she's been working at both the global and the local level. So, yeah, what's your response to that?
I think it's very complicated to unpack, but I don't think there is any big global orchestration, except in a scientific advisory sense. We're terribly indebted to the work of groups like the Stockholm Resilience Institute, giving us planetary boundaries thinking, and rafts of other really good science, because we have to be able to vision that there are limits, that there are operating spaces. And if I'm doing a shout out for the Stockholm Resilience Institute, I'll do the shout out to Kate Raworth and the donut economics, because that's that social justice inner circle. However, that's just a guiding principle, but without it, you will get fantastic work at a local level. And I'm talking about Eurocentric, Anglosphere type local food system work that's happening. But even here in this local area, we can design systems which are grassroots, equitable, locally responsible, but we can still have this ecological footprint which exceeds our just lot on the planet. And I think that is both in terms of population justice and also intergenerational justice. And I think unless we get that narrative and that science at that global level, then we make maladaptive choices at a local level. But getting that is an education pathway to getting that understanding. And it's not being driven by trade for obvious reasons. That's where I'm going to end.
Okay. James or Noi Ullivan online.
A question online for whenever. But
great. So how would you like to respond to the concept that is there a global hand helping us frame our food production system?
I'll let Ullivan go first, I think. I've already had a say.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Noi, do you have it? Yes?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think to promote the global or to kind of support in terms of the sustainable and long-term agriculture and food system I think to secure the farmers and also the kind of the best practice that we are managing the biodiversities and sustainabilities toward the productions, like the main of the agriculture production, like of rice productions or the seed managements, and kind of innovations and new technology apply for the variety of the crops and to generate more productivities and provide more productions during the seasons. That would be like apply the scientific approach or method to improve the traditional agriculture to be more modernized and innovations. Yeah, that's on my side.
Thanks, Noi. James.
Yeah, I was going to say, again, being slightly hypocritical, I'd almost argue that the creation of the concept of food systems is almost unhelpful, because it means that it's almost ungovernable. It's so big, it's so abstract, it's so multi-scale, multi-actor, etc., etc. It's almost as if we've created a rod for our own back that we think we're going to govern food systems. And it sort of brought me to thinking more about, well, at what level and what aspects can you actually govern at for a food system? I think Ro's right. You still need those sort of broad, high-level conceptual ideas, at least from a planetary perspective, to help us. But the rubber really hits the road locally, ultimately. And even there, it's complex, as I said earlier. And part of me says, well, we must keep trying and seeing what a new form of governance looks like for food systems, at least locally. But the other part of me says, well, maybe we should stop talking about food systems altogether at a local level, because it just creates too many. Again, it's a nice conceptual idea, but it in a practical sense, it's very hard to implement. And so if we can't do that, what is the alternative? What does something that achieves the same thing actually look like at a local level in terms of governance? I do worry that we've just created a monster sometimes that is ungovernable. Anyway, sorry, that's me being negative.
Thanks, James. I like it, because I think there's many people that would also agree. But Jordan, please.
Yeah, so everyone's touched on some really interesting points. I think, yeah, it is a bit, you know, when we go out in the day, we don't think, you know, of how your impacts here are going to affect somewhere on the other side of the world. You think about how your actions, you know, happen at a local level in your community. It's brought up this idea that I've come across in my PhD research of fractal governance. And I think it's more a metaphor than an actual way of maybe doing things, but I'll give an example. And fractals are these self-replicating formations in nature, and they happen naturally. And the idea is, I guess, with fractal governance is you don't necessarily have one, you know, puppet master coordinate everything, but you can have lots of different examples of this happening everywhere. And a good example of that is in Australia with First Nations communities across tens of thousands of years. There are so many countries around Australia with different communities, and the way that they approached land care was guided ultimately by principles, and we've talked about some principles today. So while every community might have had their different way of governing, it was ultimately driven by principles that they shared across the whole continent. So I think, you know, this discussion that we're having today, this morning, is really important around principles and the way that we think about governing our food system.
Thanks. I think that's an interesting example to pull up. So the principles, as you were saying, from those First Nations, were they agreed or were they discussed across from nation to nation, or were they just sort of organic and they came bottom up? It just happens because they may have shared a spatial boundary, perhaps an ecological type or something, that they were actually, they were held quite common, or some of them were held quite common throughout.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because Australia has so many different bioregions as well, so different land require different approaches to governing. But I think it was ultimately governed, and I'm not an expert in this area, so I don't want to butcher it, but it was based on principles such as reciprocity and gratitude for what you're receiving from the land, and that translated into the different governance models in those different bioregions around the continent.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, Ro.
Or there might be someone online.
There's a question online that we can jump to, but did you want to continue that?
I'd like to just extend that into that local food strategy. And I take James's point that systems might be a tricky label, but things are systems regardless. But once you start to have a local food strategy and you build respect for local food producers, you build an understanding of the food bowl, visualise the food bowl, visualise the constraints, visualise the gratitude that there is resilience in a local food system when we have bushfires, floods, climate emergencies, COVID emergencies. We come a very humble step towards something that you're alluding to, which is where we see ourselves within an ecosystem. And that's a far cry from a First Nations approach to a relationship with land, but it is incredibly helpful. And getting that narrative, I use the narrative of One Health. Many First Nations people say, oh, One Health forever, etc. And likewise, you could use almost any narrative, but to see yourself as integrated in the landscape is actually something that is powerful. And I use this analogy from a water perspective because we all should drink about 3 litres a day. We're all about 80 kilograms. That actually means that, and we're about 65% water, that actually means that we turn over the entirety of the water in our body in 3 weeks, right? For me, that's coming from the hills up here. I am 65%, my local landscape. Add in the air, add in the food, and you can reconceptualise what this governance is. It's personal and it's landscape.
Thanks. I'm just going to add something to the end of that and then we'll go to our question online. So I guess one thing I found really interesting in looking at the work that's been done on food systems and just transitions, if you look out there, there's work that's done by, for example, the Sustainable Business Council, as well as by FAO. And you can imagine that we're coming from 2 different perspectives. But I reckon one of the biggest things is that FAO talks about a global perspective, a global approach. And, Sustainable Business Council talks about practical practices that are happening, which is what Olivan was also sharing with us, how we do our farming on the ground, how we do our consumption, our production. This is really, really important. And I think this ties into the tension that we're feeling, that we've got local implementation. We may not have a global governance, but we definitely have a local governance that makes a difference in our food systems. And I keep throwing in farmers there as well, because I do know when we start to read and talk about a global food production system or food systems, quite often smallholder farmers are left out. There's a concept that there's a better way or a different way and that everyone should just quickly adopt that. When in reality, when we're talking about different types of farmers involved in that food system, I think we need a more inclusive approach to where and how and what we're actually trying to achieve. So with that, I'd like to jump to the question online.
So we had a question from Lisa McIlwain. So feel free to ask a question, Lisa, if you like.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. So I have actually 2 thoughts here. So first one, the one that I shared in the chat box was that when we are talking about new ways of doing things, new governance systems, I always have to think like, okay, but how can we first break down in their own rights resilient, let's call them negative governance structures to make way for new ones and healthier ones, or more desired ones to come through. I found in my own research, I done some work on power dynamics in collaboration, in multi-stakeholder settings. And one thing that always struck me is that we're talking a lot about knowledge diversity and stakeholder diversity, yet it always hinges on actually leveling the floor and allowing all knowledge to be part of it, even though we're talking about it, but it actually is not happening. And there is knowledge excluded through different ways by excluding certain stakeholders, or not even considering certain groups being stakeholders. So that's, to cut it short, my question would be to the panelists here. Do you have any ideas on how certain unhealthy governance structures could be broken down in order to free up the way to the things that you have suggested?
Awesome question. Thanks, Lisa. That sounds really great. Okay, so that question is around how do we break down the current structures so that when we talk about building new ones, we've got either a level playing field or we are at least acknowledging those parts that are missing already. Before we jump into answering that, we've got a couple more questions online. So how about we take those and then as a panel, we'll address them. Thanks.
The next question was from Amy. Feel free to ask your question, or otherwise we can read it out.
Hello. Now that Lisa's verbalized her question, I actually think it was a very similar one. It's really just essentially about breaking down power differentials and how you'd rebalance. Like redress power imbalances in the food system, but looking for some kind of practical examples that the group may have seen. I'm really appreciating the diversity of perspectives that are on there, and I'm just hoping that you guys might be able to give some practical examples that you've seen of those redressing power imbalances in the work that you've been doing. Thanks, guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Amy. That's terrific. We can definitely do that. And our last question online?
From Camp A.
Camp A, you've got an excellent Zoom name.
Yeah, hi, sorry, my name's Alison. Yeah, I just put a question in there because I think there's often the conversation about economy or ecology, as if there's a choice between one or the other. And there's various, formulations of the triple bottom line figure, one of which has, that's probably more accurate, has the environment or nature actually containing the social and economic aspects of things. So I think that the way that the economy is currently talked about, it's as if the way things are done at the moment is the only way they can be done. But so everything starts with an current economic system narrative. So we've got all the reports on TV, that's always reinforced. And so what I was wondering is, do we need to develop the similar develop a narrative that's expressed in a similar way that has to do with a different way of doing things, where we take Earth first or care for country as the first point we come to, and then we come to economic and social issues? That may be a bit obscure, sorry.
That's right. Thanks, Alison. I think that's a really nice one. I'm going to throw it over to our panelists. We're going to finish with Ro. We'll start with Jordan and then we'll jump to our ones online. So if the panelists would like to address the question about the power imbalances, breaking them down, any examples, and then can we touch on, if you've got something, otherwise I've got something at the end, on this economy, ecology, tension, dichotomy sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of breaking down systems, I always think about like a good crisis.
It's true. So we all need a good crisis and then a window of opportunity.
Yeah, so I think we're in that current point, or we're definitely seeing that play out. In terms of maybe a more optimistic, practical example of where I'm starting to see new kind of models pop up, I'm doing some work with a colleague at the Institute for Sustainable Futures, looking at the governance and co-benefits of these biodigester systems. So they're small to medium scale biodigesters where you can basically feed in organic waste such as agricultural residues or food waste or human excreta, depending on the feedstock and how that impacts the system. But this can be used as a way to produce cleaner fuels, biogas, and the digestate, so the leftover material can be applied on land as a super rich soil conditioner fertilizer. Anyway, we're looking at how we could set up these systems in a Pacific context in Fiji, where you have quite a top-down governance approach in the capital cities from the government, but then a lot of the time in the communities, decisions are being made based on traditional tribal approaches to governance. So we're trying to look at different ways that we can mix these different ways of governing in the way that we scale these biodigester systems. And we're working with local communities in how we do that, as well as the government. We're trying to bring everyone into the same room and talking to them. So that's an interesting way where we're starting, I guess, to push away from this top-down approach to government, which I think you see in a lot of contexts around the world, and starting to bring in a lot of those different narratives. In terms of the last question, changing economic narratives. Yeah, I was just at an ecological economics conference last weekend on Stradbroke Island, which was awesome. That's not quite my wheelhouse, but I think like one of the general principles of that is like in our current GDP, fixated approach to economics, we think of the environment being placed within the economy rather than the economy being placed within the environment. And I think those kinds of the work being done in that community with the ecological economists, they're trying to rethink, I guess, economic systems. In terms of the circular economy, I think it's a great concept, but that tries to, I spoke about the different principles, so eliminating waste from the economy, designing products for longevity, and this third principle that I'm really interested in is regenerating natural ecosystems. But to date, a lot of the research has been focused, and in practice, has been focused on those first two principles. How can we make products more efficient, which is why it's gaining so much traction in policymaker and industry circles, because it's seen as a way to grow the economy in a lot of ways. And often this third principle is forgotten. And whenever I hear GDP and the environment or sustainability used in the same sentence, I'm always a bit skeptical. So I think we really need to bring up that latter principle and bring it into the conversation.
Excellent, thanks, Jordan. I'll jump in. I'm an ecological economist.
Oh, brilliant.
And there's a lot of work that's going on about how we can rethink these things, such as no growth or degrowth, and in the economic sort of space. In the practical sort of space, I'm lucky that I teach into federal government departments where and when on economic policy analysis. And I think, we talk about it's in the local level that the real difference happens. And that's fascinating, talking to public policy makers about how they can make better decisions, being more inclusive of both people and the environment from the start. And so I do think that change is happening, but it's pretty small. So small bits of work, I would say, are scattered out there. All right, let's jump to our other panelist. Noi, I'm going to throw over to you perhaps for some practical examples about how we might be able to break down the power balances we currently have in our food systems and how we might rejig them going forward.
Yeah.
Hybrids. Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I would share a bit from my perspective that I think that would also be more focused on the policies and the local partnership with all the sector stakeholder in order to make the rise or equal from the producer and consumer through the markets or the system. And yeah, I would say the policies is more important, that they can also ensure that the support from the governments to the right communities and particularly the production's price and the crops variabilities.
Great. Thanks, Noi. And an example that we have very practically is that we're looking at working with the Lao government, their agriculture, their Department of Agriculture and Research, to actually envisage a positive future for smallholder farmers in 2050, and then talk about what are the creative and real policies we can start implementing in the short term to deliver that more desirable sort of approach. And we are taking an inclusive approach by looking at multiple stakeholders and our involvement in it. So that's one very practical example about how we can move from a current positionality where government makes 5-year plans in Lao and tells everyone what to do, to a more future thinking and a more inclusive process to get us there. Okay, James, would you like to jump in on power dynamics and economy and ecology?
Thank you. Yep, good question. So two elements to that, I think, from our perspective. I think the first is we should all get much better at understanding power dynamics in a concerted way in all of our work. And of course, power implies a negative, well, it has a sort of negative connotation of someone having power over somebody else, which of course is true. But there's all sorts of other elements of power, including power within and power to, and so on. And so there are also positive elements of power which we need to be able to understand, and where that lies within the particular context that we're working in. I think that's an essential first step for all of us, and something we probably all need to be much better at if we're thinking pragmatically about working in participatory projects around food system change. And then following on from that, I think you're right, crises and windows of opportunity, yes, absolutely. And so what we've been trying to do in our work, at least, is build up a sort of a community of knowledge brokers, as we call them. So these are local individuals who voluntarily want to become able and have the skills to recognize opportunities to shift things or to take advantage of situations when they arise, in order to shift the system towards what they collectively would like. Some people might call these change agents, but I think the knowledge broker or sort of term is a little bit more nuanced, because it's about actually being able to use different kinds of knowledge to influence a particular situation and create change, whereas a change agent can often just be someone who likes throwing firecrackers around and making a name for themselves. So that's one way to look at this, in particularly in terms of participatory processes, how to give people more agency and power locally who are willing to do so, so that whenever the opportunity arises to shift a particular governance problem, they at least locally have some of the ability to recognize that and their own confidence to do it. So I think that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. Ro.
I'm reflecting on that positive power and the crisis windows of opportunity. And I also think when you're talking about these negative power structures, it's very difficult to break them down directly, but it's really effective to give an alternative. And that's what we're seeing. And that's partly a response to these crises and windows of opportunity. I'm very enthusiastic about local food strategies, and they have come about for a number of reasons, including responding to those disasters. But that way of seeing and thinking and doing things differently at a multi-stakeholder, much more inclusive of human and environmental needs. Now, that's good. Now, at the same time, that overarching narrative is really important. We've now got dairy industries, grain industries, meat industries that are going to net zero. You might debate about how they're doing it, but the incentive is there. There is huge volumes of people working towards solution finding. In terms of GDP, we've got numbers of cities, nations that are looking at wellbeing as an alternative metric. And within that, health, social support, equity, environment, climate, are all factors of well-being. We're looking at well-being economies. I mean, there is change happening, and I think it's about that narrative and really making sure that it's heard and shared. And that comes to James's point, making change agents empowered to respond to opportunities. Narratives. I'm not going to say any more, actually. I'm going to throw it to you. I think we've said enough on that.
Really? Okay. How about a practical example? Can you share us a practical example about power that may have been broken down or a new power structure created, which was more equitable or inclusive and was able to thrive?
Look, if I just take a local food system, we used to just buy food in, sell it through to, we've got a duopoly of supermarkets in many Australian cities. Now, that was really food commodity story. Now, breaking that down in some of these local food strategies, one's in Melbourne, Ballarat, all across the country, we have now got empowered local food producers, community gardens, farmers markets, consumer producer networks, and that changes the structure of it's a food sovereignty and food access story. Now that might seem low scale, but that is what we're actually trying to do across the board, changing a top-down approach to what we eat and how we consume to something that we have a participatory engagement in.
Yeah, nice. Excellent. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to just check if there's any questions from the room after we've had our discussion. Yeah, Wendy.
Thanks so much. It's a reflection in a way, bringing it, thinking about the context of discussions about Earth system governance in an age of polycrisis. I guess I'm hearing a lot of agreement and a lot of people on the same page, but also maybe some tensions that we may not have time to finish discussing in this section, but I feel will be really relevant to the whole day of hybrid webinars. And that is whether governing huge systems of interconnected challenges that affect, that can't be narrowed down to a single local community challenge, but reflect, and are part of bigger global networks. You've all reflected on that. Does governance need to imply top-down? Can we have local approaches to governance? Does a pathways approach need to imply a kind of incremental approach? Or segueing into the next webinar session where we talk about transformational approaches, I feel like some people would be concerned that the transformations that we need mean that we're going to risk edging out local and looking at things from a big picture top-down perspective. So I don't know if there's a single question for each of you in there, but I wondered if we'll get to that.
Thanks, Wendy. That's great. I think there's a couple of things for us to pull on there. We've got a comment online as well. Can we grab that?
Catherine, did you want to mention the experiment you flagged in the chat?
I'm not sure whether I'm coming through, am I?
Yes, it's fine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, some university students decided to put together a manual for introducing real food to young people. Consisted of recipes and lots of activism. And when they tried it out on people, it became very well received by top chefs, food activists, all sorts of people, all the way up to the current King of England, much to their surprise. And it was also very well accepted all around Canberra. School canteens got excited about introducing real food, and the young people got excited about lobbying school canteens to do that sort of thing. So it was most interesting to see how a locally published book could make such a difference. And I, as an editor of the book, think that the main reason was that in addition to doing that work, they also promoted it. I think a lot of things happen at the local level that are wonderful, but possibly there needs to be more help for the people doing them to learn how to promote them in the community through the local media. I think that might be a missing step as to why some of the wonderful stuff that's going on doesn't necessarily get aired so well.
Yeah.
And doesn't spread upwards. So we're actually producing another book called Nature Rules, which is about how children go on from the school strike to use the power they discovered they had in ways that are much more practical from within the school. And again, the key to that is going to be promoting. And thank you for letting me mention it. I'm doing a bit already. And thank you for this wonderful forum.
And that probably comes back to perhaps some of Wendy's reflections as well, before I just throw around very quickly to our panel for their last points or last thoughts on this. But I actually think one of the big reasons that we're talking about food systems is that about 20 years ago, we recognised that there were only 3 people that owned all the seeds in the world. And therefore, we needed a more inclusive approach to where and how our food was produced and owned. And whilst that's not talked about as much, it is really prevalent in the discussion that we are now, just even having this, we are now being more inclusive and more open and promoting the fact that that's not good enough for all of us going forward. So we do have a crisis on the hold, and I am excited to hear some of the comments that come through later on about where and how this tie together. But in our last couple of minutes, I'd just like 1 minute from each of our speakers. I was going to ask what they think is the biggest barrier to overcome, but I think perhaps it might be just nice to ask them what's the including sports for this. And I'm going to start online. Can we start with James and then Ullavan?
Thank you. And hi, Wendy, if that is the Wendy I think it is. Sort of half responding to your question, Wendy, it's my reflection from this exercise, which has been very helpful, is that the way that you framed this, Leonie, as an overall discussion in terms of needing to boost food production to feed the world, I feel like I'm going to break into song, but I probably shouldn't. It is actually when we're looking at a local level, a lot of it is potentially very selfish in that it's all about self-sufficiency, looking after ourselves, making sure that we've got what we need, rather than producing enough food that there's a surplus to feed anybody else. And certainly in Kiribati and the Solomons, that the conversation is basically about self-sufficiency. So I wonder how that meshes if we're going to build from the bottom up with a bigger global challenge of producing more food for everyone. So that's something that's sort of just dawned on me. So thank you all very much for that. And thanks, Wendy, even if that wasn't really your question.
Thanks. Thanks. Noi, your final thoughts or your biggest barrier you think we need to overcome?
Yeah. So sorry, I did not catch the question before this. Can you remind me again, please?
So just your final thoughts from this panel, if you have any, or what do you the biggest barrier that we need to overcome to achieve a just transition in our food systems?
Okay, yeah. First of all, I think this approach is very informative that we have been discussing in the multiple perspective. And yes, to overcome and to implement, I think we can start from now and the young generation. And as we mentioned earlier, that future farmer is more important, that they are the one who will produce the long-term food and sustainable food system for us. So to provide this kind of capacity on the ground and from the young generations and from give them more understanding from the primary educations and scale up, then they can be a good consumer and they can be a good producer as a future farmer or future sustainabilities of the generations. Yeah, I think this is, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Noi, that's great. All right, we'll go to Ro and then to John.
I actually want to ask the question, when has transformation happened from top down? But local hasn't been where the actors are. And I think that's going to be a segue for what you're going to talk about later on, perhaps. For me, the food system is so central. It contains what we need for people to survive. It is in real juxtaposition with conserving biodiversity. And it's got this climate impact, and it's very complex. And I'm in agreement with James. Getting local solutions is not something that is the answer to all, but it is where the innovation and the changing structures and the changing powers is happening. And we can't feed everyone at local level in most situations, but it's a core of resilience, core of different relationships. Understanding that global science, so that we can put it into perspective, understand who is doing better, who is doing worse, is so important.
Awesome. Thank you. Don.
Just to bring it up a little bit to just talking about what governance is essentially. And it's essentially the rules we make to live, work and play at any scale of human activity. And there's an organisation called the Australian Earth Law Alliance, which I get a lot of inspiration for my work from. And they have this really simple iceberg analogy of governance. And at the tip of the iceberg is the rules, like the formal rules that you might see in the top-down governance model, such as laws, regulations, policies, market mechanisms. But then at the bottom of the iceberg is ultimately the cultural value and belief systems that drive those more formal mechanisms. And I think that the biggest barrier maybe to implementing some of these reforms in governance systems is actually shifting the mindsets and paradigms that sit at the bottom of that iceberg. And I think that's where place-based solutions really come in, and place-based solutions are a central tenet of Earth-centered approaches to governance. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you. I'd like to have my final word on this one. I don't think we have a global food systems governance. I think that we just have a lot of really interested and participatory players that are out there, but we do have knowledge and we do have information and we do have ideas. So just reiterating what Ro was saying, that's really important, but that doesn't create a governance system. I don't think in the way that we structure. I think that it's our more local approaches and the social norms that we have and that we implement that are really part of what our governance is looking like across the world. So on that, I'd like to say a big thank you to our whole panel. I'd like to also say for our participants and the questions and the comments throughout. Thank you.
So much, everyone. Thanks everyone who joined online as well, and for presentations and moderation from Leonie. We will have a lunch break in a moment, and so for those in person, maybe while things are just getting set up, maybe we can do a little group photo. For those who have joined online, our next session will start in just under an hour, and if you're a participant, I believe you will need to just join the individual session link. So via the forum website, there will be a separate link to our next session on transdisciplinarity. So look forward to seeing you at 1:30 for that next session.
Thanks.
Good. Thanks, Leonie.
Can we before people dash to leave or go to the toilet or whatever?